So what about sharing data online? What about the cloud? So we did speak about it a little bit in James's interview, but we spoke about a lot of things as well. So to cover this aspect, to really get into more about the technical side, I have done an interview with Mike Dixson, who is the unofficial server expert at Ravensbourne. He's currently the project manager of networking, and his previous job at Ravensbourne was the security administrator. As a bit of history for what the cloud is, the cloud service, often referred to as the cloud, is a virtual space online that allows a user to store and share information. So it's pretty much summarises everything up nicely. So here's the interview with Mike and I.
Hi, I'm Mike Dixon. I'm project manager for networking at Ravensbourne.
Cool, thank you. So many people are uploading and accessing data on the web. What kind of security issues does this have on servers?
It means that information is suddenly a lot more broadly shared. You can't necessarily rely on information to be in one place. So whereas before it was, you'd have your local work network, so you'd upload everything to your server. Now you don't necessarily know that all of the work information is on the work server. Somebody could have put something in the cloud, somebody could have stored something in Dropbox, something like that, and so it's a lot harder to control. It means that we have to kind of set a lot more things in policy actually than through prohibitive means via technical methods. I think that's probably the biggest thing really.
Cool, I never knew that. But I don't know anything about servers. What are your thoughts on file sharing services like Dropbox, Mediafire, Google Drive, and Google Drive app?
Again, that opens up very much the same sort of area of it just kind of blurs the lines between where our data is and where public data is, sort of thing. So Dropbox is a particularly difficult one because it works on ports that we can't block because they're needed for other things, like web surfing and so on. So we can't stop people using Dropbox, but that data isn't then in our control to be able to go, okay, we need to get that data back, or we need to protect that data for some reason. So that's a bit of a nightmare, and so we have to policy. Whereas Google Apps and Google Drive, because we use Google as an institutional email system, we have Google Drive as part of that, and so that is in our control. And so as long as they're using their Ravensbourne login, we can then go, okay, well, those documents are there, we need to pull them back for something. Like if somebody leaves, for instance, you don't want data disappearing with them, you want to be able to keep all that data for other people to use after they've left. So it's a bit of a headache, but we have to keep our eye on it really, and sort of keep an eye on new things as they come out, new products as they come out.
So would that be affected by things like I know Dropbox was hacked into like a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
Would that affect the servers, say?
It doesn't affect our servers, but it means that we need to be mindful of the data. It's sort of data protection and just sort of where our data is a lot more of an important and a lot more of a confusing factor now, because literally, somebody could say, okay, I want to just go share this file with somebody who's maybe a client, and so maybe there is a non-disclosure agreement or whatever, or copyright agreement in place there between those parties, but then that data is shared on their Dropbox, and so if somebody hacks their Dropbox, then that's a Data Protection Act infringement against us, you see. So even though it's Dropbox that essentially had the technical issue there, so it's a bit of a nightmare again.
Let's check if it's still cool. Okay. Sorry, sometimes it switches off randomly.
Yeah,
why were staff and students' emails switched over to Google?
That was done as part of the transition from the old building to the new building, because there was going to be a period of time where all of our servers were going to be offline whilst we moved them all here, and then whilst we powered them up here and got everything up and running, the whole network. It's a brand new network here, completely from scratch. No network infrastructure came across from the old building, so it's all brand new. So we knew there was going to be a period of time where email was going to be unavailable if we didn't do something like move it to the cloud. And seeing as Google offered that service for free and it's a good, reliable service, it seemed like the best choice. So that's why we went with that.
So will you eventually go back to hosting?
No, but really because email is one of those things where it's so run of the mill and basic that there is no real reason for us to do it. We can't add anything to that service by hosting it internally. Google subscribed to a thing called the Safe Harbor Act, which is the US equivalent of the Data Protection Act. So we know that they match up with our data protection policies and so on. And it means that they've got this vast infrastructure that is very resilient, whereas if we had it here, we would have a much smaller portion of that, the resiliency. And then that means that anytime there's an internet connectivity problem here, it affects all of the students and all of the staff's email. Whereas if Google have an internet problem, that's a much bigger problem, and they're going to have a bigger team, bigger pool of resources to deal with that. So for something like email, where it's sort of piecemeal stuff, we can say actually somebody else can do that, and that's the best thing for the institution.
Okay. What are some of the security issues that could go wrong with servers?
Oh, that's a big question. Many things really.
You don't have to name them all, just a
yeah,
few.
no, it's one of those things where it's how long is a piece of string, because I know somebody, for instance, who they don't like firewalls. They think firewalls are kind of a non-necessity sort of thing, but they're assuming a pattern of behaviour. They're assuming that they're going to open up certain ports on a machine, and that's the only way that anyone can get in and out of that machine. And so as long as that's secure, that's fine. But in actual fact, somebody could use an exploit on one of those existing ports that is a new exploit that, because you don't know about it before the hacker does, they're in, and then they've got a full run of the machine. So there's kind of we just have to follow best practices and make sure that we lock down machines so that if somebody does get into a machine, they can do as little as possible, for instance, and that it's logged and tracked so we know what they've done and whether they've used that to go anywhere else, sort of thing. So we have to worry about how they get in, which is referred to as an attack vector, and then we have to worry about what they've done when they're there, so we have to log everything and make sure that everything on that server itself is secured enough that they can't do, the damage is limited basically when somebody gets in. And then we have to make sure that where they can go from there is also restricted, so if they get into one server, they don't get access to all servers and so on. So I always say that security is about usability versus security, because you could have the best security in the world. The best secure room in the world would be a room with no doors and windows, but then it's not the most usable room in the world. So you've got to find the right balance for that. So it's quite a minefield, but fortunately there's a lot of best practices that are laid out, and then you just have to tailor those and tune those to your organisation, really.
Okay. That's all good. Is it safe to store important information on cloud servers?
It's a very difficult question, because once you put stuff in the cloud, you're agreeing to somebody else's policies, so you need to really, all those big terms and conditions that come up that we all go click yes or whatever, you need to be a bit more mindful of those, particularly around how they might use your data and whether they allow any third parties access to it. You also need to be wary of the reputation of that cloud service. So using something like Google, even if they let somebody into the data, they've got a lot of public visibility, so they could be, they would be hauled over the coals if they did something that everyone didn't agree with. Whereas if you use some smaller service that's a new startup sort of thing, you're going to be much more in a position where if they do something a bit naughty with your data, you're going to be the one who comes off badly out of it, and you're not going to necessarily be able to get back at them, sort of thing. Aside from getting them to pay fees for or fines for Data Protection Act infringement, things like that. So it's very much down to what you feel comfortable with sharing and who with. If you had a photo that you thought was, it's a funny photo of somebody I know, and you pinned it up on a wall, you've made that like literally a physical wall, you've made that public, you have to accept that everyone's going to look at that. Somebody could draw on it, somebody could steal it, whatever. If you gave a photo to a trusted friend and said, show it around their friends, you're limiting the exposure of that. So it's very much the same feel in the real world. If you're not comfortable with the audience that might seeing that data, don't put it there, basically.
True, the internet never forgets.
Yes.
Once you go out there. So my lead question is the internet a safe place to store and share information?
You'd have to define safe, essentially. It's safe enough in terms of on a per service basis. You have to know that service is safe. You can't. The internet itself is literally just the wires that connect all those servers. The servers and the services themselves that's where you're putting your data. That's where you need to be focused on for whether they're safe to store your data. So for anything that we do as an institution that involves data going elsewhere, we have to be very, very careful with it because of the Data Protection Act, and anything that's in the US, for instance, we have to make sure they subscribe to the Safe Harbour Protection Act, or anything in the EU, they have to be subscribed to the Data Protection Act. So we have to make sure that we tick a lot of boxes here, because if we don't, we're in big trouble when somebody's data goes walking, sort of thing. And I think with regards to sharing stuff, if you're sharing it, like I was trying to explain that analogy, if you're sharing it with that audience, that is, you've got to be comfortable with that audience seeing it. You could put up something on Twitter. If your Twitter feed is public, you've got to be comfortable with everyone seeing it. There's no good saying, I had a rant at 5 o'clock in the morning and bared my soul to the internet, and now I'm a bit upset about everyone's response to it. You bared your soul to the internet. That's what you did. Whilst I don't strictly agree with Google's kind of strapline that they use sometimes for their privacy policies and so on, it does make a good sense as a rule of thumb. If you're not doing anything bad, then you've got nothing to worry about somebody looking at your data. Well, everyone's got secrets, everyone's got things that they don't necessarily want to be public, so don't put those on the internet, essentially. I think you need to be mindful of your data.
Okay, so that's it. That's all my
Okay.
questions. You're actually
Excellent.
really quick. That was the quickest interview I've ever done. 20 minutes.
Really? Excellent.
Well, this is like 13 minutes,
Yeah.
so if you look at it like that.
Very good.
So thanks for doing the interview with me.
That's all right. No worries.
We touched on topics like Dropbox, MediaFile and other file sharing services. We also touched on why Ravensbourne moved to Google Gmail, especially since they already have the faculties to host their own email addresses for the students and the staff. But when you look at something like the Google server room, you can understand why. Also, when you consider the time and the protocols like Mike was talking about, you can understand why they moved to Google. It's easier to have someone else host it. During the interview, we also touched on what users put online. This was a good point, as it was something that myself and others spoke, and the other interviews had spoke about before. You as a user have to be wary about what you're posting up online. Like Lizzie said, it's inevitable, but it doesn't mean you have to go back and bare your soul to Twitter, referring back to what Mike said.